When you think about the story of America's beginning, you probably picture pilgrims and a Thanksgiving dinner. A simple tale of people seeking freedom, sharing a harvest, and starting a new nation. But that's not the whole story. It's not even close to the beginning of it. For more than 300 years before the first shots of the Revolution, the New World was the stage for a brutal winner-take-all race. It was a race between Viking longships, Spanish galleons hungry for gold, French fur traders on icy rivers, and ambitious English adventurers just desperate for a foothold. They weren't just exploring, they were playing a ruthless game for control of a continent. Their goals were power, wealth, and glory, and the consequences of losing were devastating. The prize? Nothing less than the future of North America itself. So, who really won the race to conquer America? And what was the brutal price of their victory? Long before the great powers of Europe even thought to look west, a different kind of explorer sliced through the North Atlantic. Around the year 1000, the Norse, or as we know them, the Vikings, made the first documented European landing in the Americas. Led by men like Leif Erikson, they sailed from Greenland to a new land they called Vinland. For centuries, their sagas telling of this were dismissed as just boastful myths. But then, in the 1960s, archaeologists in Newfoundland, Canada, found something incredible at a site called L'Anse aux Meadows. They unearthed the remains of Norse-style buildings and artifacts. It was concrete proof. Europeans had been in North America almost 500 years before Columbus. This small outpost, dated to around 1021, was an unbelievable achievement of navigation and sheer guts. You could say the Vikings had won the first leg of the race before it even officially started. But their victory didn't last. The settlement was tiny. The supply lines back to Greenland were impossibly long, and their encounters with the native peoples, whom they called Skraelings, were often violent. After a relatively short time, the Norse abandoned their foothold, though they may have returned for intermittent visits for a few more decades. Their incredible journey became a historical footnote, a false start in the grand race for a continent. For centuries after, the Americas were left to their original inhabitants, and the memory of the Viking experiment faded into legend. But that silence was about to be broken by a new, far more determined competitor. In 1492, the world changed. When Christopher Columbus, bankrolled by Spain, stumbled upon the Caribbean islands, he didn't just discover a new world. He fired the starting pistol for the biggest land rush in human history. For Spain, the timing was perfect. They had just finished the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to retake Spain from the Moors, and were bursting with military energy, religious fervor, and a bottomless appetite for gold. They funneled all of it into the Americas, and for the better part of a century, they ran the race almost entirely on their own, even as powers like Portugal were claiming their own stake in Brazil far to the south. Spain's strategy was simple, swift, brutal conquest. The conquistadors weren't settlers looking to build a new life. They were soldiers of fortune, lured by rumors of golden cities. They came to dominate, to extract wealth, and to convert indigenous people to Catholicism, often at the point of a sword. The very first permanent European colonies in what is now the United States were Spanish. In 1508, Juan Ponce de Leon founded a settlement in Puerto Rico. He then looked north to a mysterious land he named La Florida in 1513. His attempts to build a colony there were met with fierce resistance, and he was killed in 1521 during an attack by local warriors. But Spain was relentless. Where one expedition failed, another was sure to follow. While early attempts like the 1526 colony of San Miguel de Gualdape quickly fizzled out, Spain's persistence eventually paid off. In 1565, Pedro Menendez de Aviles established St. Augustine on the Florida coast. It was founded specifically to kick out a rival French settlement, becoming a key military fort. Today, it stands as the oldest continuously inhabited European-founded city in the continental United States, a stone and mortar testament to Spain's early dominance. And that was just the start. In Mexico, Hernán Cortés toppled the mighty Aztec Empire. In Peru, Francisco Pizarro crushed the Inca. The gold and silver that poured back to Spain from these conquests was staggering, funding Spain's armies and making it the most powerful nation on Earth. Their empire stretched from California and the American Southwest all the way down to the tip of South America. By the mid-1500s, it looked like the race was already over. Spain had built a massive, wealthy, and seemingly unbeatable lead, while its rivals were still fumbling to get off the starting block. While Spain was busy building its golden empire in the south, another European power started sniffing around the northern part of the continent. France entered the race not with an army of soldiers, but with explorers and merchants chasing a completely different prize: a northern route to Asia, the legendary Northwest Passage. Early trips by Jacques Cartier in the 1530s staked a French claim along the St. Lawrence River, but it took until the early 1600s for their colonial project to really get going. In 1608, Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec, the future heart of New France. Unlike the Spanish, the French didn't find any glittering empires of gold. The cold, dense forests of the north held a different kind of treasure: fur. The demand in Europe for beaver pelts to make fancy hats was through the roof, and this one commodity became the engine of France's entire colonial operation. This focus on fur meant a totally different strategy. Where the Spanish conquered and enslaved, the French needed the cooperation of Native Americans. The French model was built on trade and alliances. French traders, the legendary coureurs des bois, or runners of the woods, often lived among native tribes, learned their languages, and even married into their families. They created a massive network of trading posts that stretched from the St. Lawrence River, through the Great Lakes, and all the way down the Mississippi. On a map, this made the French Empire look enormous. But in reality, it was a ghost empire, thinly populated and spread out. It was more of a commercial network than a collection of towns and farms. This reliance on native alliances made the French powerful players in the region, but it also dragged them into local conflicts. While Spain's empire was one of cities and mines, France's was an empire of rivers and forests, a sprawling, profitable, and ultimately vulnerable enterprise. They weren't trying to beat Spain at their own game. They were playing a different one, a long-term gambit for the heart of the continent. While Spain got rich and France built its web of trading posts, England was the awkward, late arrival to the party. For most of the 1500s, England was a second-rate power, tangled up in its own religious conflicts and constantly living in the shadow of mighty Catholic Spain. Their first moves in the New World weren't grand colonial projects, but state-sponsored piracy, with privateers like Sir Francis Drake gleefully raiding Spanish treasure ships. But England's ambition was fueled by a burning rivalry with Spain and a deep-seated fear of being left behind for good. Their first real attempt at a colony was an infamous disaster. In the 1580s, Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored a settlement on Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina. The colony was poorly supplied, and when a ship finally returned in 1590, the place was completely empty. The only clue to the fate of over 100 men, women, and children was the word Croatoan, carved into a post. The lost colony became a chilling, cautionary tale of England's failure to get its act together. It wasn't until 1607 that England finally, barely, got a permanent foothold. The Virginia Company, a private business whose goal was simply to make money for its investors, founded Jamestown. It was a near-total catastrophe. The colonists, many of them gentlemen who weren't exactly used to hard labor, were completely unprepared for the wilderness. They wasted time looking for gold that didn't exist while forgetting to plant food. The infamous starving time during the winter of 1609 to 1610 was so bad that colonists resorted to eating rats, leather, and even digging up their own dead. Jamestown survived by a thread, mostly thanks to the iron-fisted leadership of Captain John Smith, and crucially, the discovery of a profitable strain of tobacco. That cash crop saved Virginia and gave England its own economic model for a colony, one built on agriculture and land. Meanwhile, further north, a completely different kind of English colony was taking shape. In 1620, the Pilgrims, a group of religious separatists, landed at Plymouth. They weren't looking for gold, they were looking for God and the freedom to worship their own way. A decade later, a much larger, better organized group of Puritans founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. These New England colonies were built around tight-knit, religious communities and family farms. Together, the profit-driven southern colonies and the pious northern ones formed the foundation of English America, a messy, determined, and rapidly expanding patchwork of settlements. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, the race entered its final, bloodiest phase. Any illusion of peaceful coexistence was gone. The colonial empires of Spain, France, and England weren't just dots on a map anymore. They were grinding against each other, their borders bleeding into one another. The competition for land, resources, and especially for influence over Native American tribes exploded into open war. The main flashpoint was the Ohio River Valley. For England's 13 colonies, with their booming populations and land-hungry settlers, pushing west was a matter of destiny. For France, that same valley was the vital artery connecting their Canadian territories to Louisiana. It was a collision course, plain and simple. This rivalry turned North America into a battlefield for Europe's own endless power struggles. Wars like King William's War and Queen Anne's War, fought in Europe, had their own bloody chapters written in the forests of America. The French and the British both armed their Native American allies, pulling them into a devastating cycle of raids and reprisals that terrorized the frontier. This century of simmering conflict finally blew up in a decisive showdown, the French and Indian War, which started in 1754. This wasn't just another colonial fight. It was the American theater of a global war known as the 7 Years' War. It was a war for the continent. For the first few years, the French and their native allies handed the more numerous but clumsy British forces one humiliating defeat after another. But Britain, using its powerful navy to cut off French supplies and pouring incredible amounts of money and soldiers into the fight, slowly turned the tide. The breaking point came in 1759 with the British capture of Quebec, the heart of New France. When the war ended in 1763, the map had been completely redrawn. France was forced to give all of its territory east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain. The French dream of a North American empire was over. So, who won the brutal race to conquer America? If you just look at the map in 1763, the answer seems obvious. Spain still held a huge empire in the south and west, but in the strategic heartland of North America, Great Britain was the clear winner. They had knocked out the French and planted a string of populous, economically booming colonies that were ready to dominate the continent. In a race that started with a Viking false start and a century-long Spanish head start, the late-arriving English had against all odds won. But this victory came at an unimaginable cost. The story of colonization isn't about empty lands being settled. It's a story of conquest. The New World was, in fact, a very old world, home to millions of people with their own rich civilizations. For them, the arrival of Europeans was an apocalypse. Diseases spread through trade networks, sometimes even faster than the Europeans themselves, wiped out entire populations who had no immunity. The relentless hunger for land and resources led to centuries of warfare, displacement, and broken promises. While many indigenous groups were shattered, Others survived through fierce resistance, strategic adaptation, and sheer resilience. The race to conquer America wasn't won with maps and flags. It was won with steel, guns, and germs. It was a competition that built European empires while devastating the peoples of the Americas. The legacy of that brutal, centuries-long race is baked into the DNA of the United States and Canada. A legacy of incredible achievement and profound tragedy. A story of empires rising and worlds being destroyed. The race for the continent didn't really end in 1763. It just entered a new chapter, and we are all still living with the consequences.